This is the island of Ireland, and this is the Republic of Ireland. Looking at it, you'll notice about 83% of the island of Ireland only actually belongs to the country of Ireland. So, if you want to know why that's not 100%, it's because the remaining 17% of it belongs to the country of Northern Ireland. Now, I know what you're thinking. How does this make sense? When we talk about the north of France, it's still France. The north of Sweden is still Sweden. So why not Ireland? Well, look no further than to its neighbours on the right, the United Kingdom, because Northern Ireland is just a constituent of it. But lately, it seems more and more likely that a united Ireland may actually happen after over a century of being split apart. To understand why though, we first need to understand how we've got to a situation in which the island of Ireland came to be split in two in the first place. Ireland has been ruled to some degree by the UK since the 1100s, but to cut history a bit short, the main story begins around the 16th century, when the King of England, Henry VIII, also became the King of Ireland in 1541, after a combination of suppression and corrupt deals. Next came the systematic colonization by Scottish and English Protestants to the northern regions of Ireland, done in order to strengthen British control over the island and to reduce the power of the native Irish Catholic population. The most famous of this being the organized colonization of the Ulster province under King James I, where over 100,000 settlers had moved in. The Irish, and here we are talking essentially about Catholics now too, grew increasingly unhappy as the British government tightened the political and economic power of minority Protestant communities, which then sparked resistance against the oppressive English, and during this period we saw the roots of the partition of Ireland. British rule at the time ranged in styles from indifferent to incompetent to violent, and back to indifferent again. The British mishandling of a potato disease in the 1840s resulted in famine and the death of approximately 1 million Irish people who relied heavily on it as their staple food. This caused many to flee overseas, particularly to the United States, in the hopes of finding a new life, causing the Irish population to fall by 20 to 25%. To this day, the island of Ireland still hasn't reached pre-famine population levels of 8.5 million people, sitting at just 7 million today. The relationship between island and mainland deteriorated further and further as Protestant and Catholic factions became increasingly hostile, and eventually a violent uprising followed in 1916 with the aim of establishing an independent Irish republic known as the Easter Rising. After all the bloodshed and abuse from it, public support shifted from an initial idea of self-governance under Britain known as Home Rule to complete independence, leading to the radical, pro-republic Sinn Féin party being elected after. Eventually, an Irish War of Independence broke out in 1919 as a result of everything, and by 1922, Southern Ireland officially became independent as the Republic of Ireland. But since the UK had moved so many Protestant Unionist people into Northern Ireland over the past decades, there was now a distinct cultural difference that tied Ireland's north much closer to the land that used to be a clearer colonizer, resulting in a majority who wanted to remain in the UK, hence the division we see today. But the new border that brought about a new independent country was inevitably an unhappy compromise, as Northern Ireland's Catholics continued to be discriminated against in all aspects of life. While many in the Republic of Ireland felt bitter that a portion of what they saw as their land was still run by England, these issues became fertile grounds for anti-Protestant and anti-government unrest and violence. From the 1960s through to the 1990s, violence regularly erupted that most often resulted in civilian casualties in Northern Ireland, but also sometimes in Great Britain. Even UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher was lucky to escape an assassination attempt by the Irish Republican Army, or IRA, in 1984. During all this, Sinn Féin continued to receive widespread sympathy and support in Ireland, even whilst being seen as terrorists by some and being so openly associated with groups like the IRA, making such direct attacks on the British state. Then, in 1998, came what was for the first time in centuries, a credible peace deal, the Good Friday Agreement. It was a peace agreement reached between the British and Irish governments and most of the political parties in Northern Ireland.
We are here, reaching out the hand of friendship and peace between Orange and Green, of Ireland free and independent.
It called for an end to the violence, a devolved government for Northern Ireland, with both unionist and nationalist parties sharing power, and some other things like the normalization of cross-border cooperation. But perhaps most importantly, an agreement that if the people of Northern Ireland ever voted to rejoin the Republic of Ireland, they'd be allowed to do so. This is basically how things stayed for years. Both countries knew the majority of the people of Northern Ireland wished to stay part of the United Kingdom, and that a significant minority in Northern Ireland wanted a united Ireland. But nothing changed because of it. These days though, the situation has gotten a bit more complex. It's no longer much about Catholics versus Protestants, but rather social and economic factors which are more important and less clear-cut. As for why this is important, well, Brexit. the United Kingdom decided in 2016 that it no longer wanted to be part of the European Union, much to the disapproval of Scotland, Northern Ireland, and, well, basically most of the world. The controversy added to revived debates about not just Irish independence, but also to the breakup of the Union by Scotland too. You see, Northern Ireland is the only land border between the United Kingdom and the European Union. This border has for a long time been soft, without boundaries and checkpoints. But now, after Brexit, it could become much harder again due to the UK leaving the EU's single market and customs union, which in turn causes even more economic and political difficulty to the people on both sides. Also, remember, Northern Ireland never wanted to leave the EU in the first place. It was basically forced into it. Ever since this, by most economic measures, things have worked out better for the Republic of Ireland. And the more negative the impacts of Brexit become clear, the more people in the north will be wondering what they're doing being left behind in the United Kingdom, where many regions outside London feel like afterthoughts. And with that, the idea of a united Ireland is once again gaining real traction, especially as it would allow for the Northern Irish to remain in a single market with the Republic of Ireland, which is in the EU. In addition to this, even though religion isn't as important as it used to be, like I said before, it's still playing a factor. 2021 was the year that Catholics outnumbered Protestants in Northern Ireland for the first time in centuries, moving the conversation on Irish unity a little bit closer. Currently, polls show that people aged under 30 now have strong majorities for reunification. Northern Irish youth also have been able to gain more knowledge about the effects of British colonization due to the advancements of technology and their access to academic sources not associated with the British state, unlike in the past. All demographic indicators seem to point to the idea that the majority throughout the whole population will soon be in favor of reunification, with some polls showing that threshold has already been crossed. I mean, Sinn Féin, the party that in the past played a monumental role in the movement and fighting for an independent Ireland, has for the first time ever become the largest political party in Northern Ireland as of today, as well as the joint largest in the Republic of Ireland too. But of course, there are quite a lot of problems with the idea of a united Ireland. The first being that the North is essentially a bottomless money hole. Let me explain. You see, Northern Ireland is the poorest region of the UK, and it basically needs tons of help. It's being given billions of dollars every year in subsidies by London, with a record 18.5 billion in 2021, and it still honestly isn't enough. Replacing this type of aid would be an insane challenge for Ireland, because even if unification works out in the long term, short term it will be expensive, with citizens bearing the cost most likely. These reservations are very similar to how West Germany felt before unification with the East too, given East Germany was a much weaker economy and that they had to bear the burden of economic reconstruction. In the short term, it did end up making life more difficult for average Western Germans, but it obviously did work out in the end. Another problem is that 27% of all employees in Northern Ireland are either civil or public servants belonging to the UK. So until there's a certainty over jobs, nothing will start moving along. And this is part of a bigger problem. No one really knows what a united Ireland would look like. I mean, yeah, there's talks about a new flag and stuff, but things like civil service and healthcare are massive unanswered questions and concerns people have with unity, especially in the North, who seem to be way more unsure about a united Ireland than the Republic. It's stuff like this that actually matters. People in Northern Ireland too are growing tired of the constant nationalism versus unionism and want stability. In my opinion though, it seems that they'd rather get the stability from a united Ireland than being a part of a union that might break apart if Scotland finally ends up leaving. But it's hard to say if a united Ireland is inevitable, because just so much needs to be done in order to get to a point where it might happen. What do you think though? Will there ever be a united Ireland? Thank you for watching.